talking about negates in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is going to be an interesting one.
What is up, duelists, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Discussion video. I was working on a little bit of a scripted video on what good Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to me, and while I was doing that, I kind of realized there's a lot of different topics in there that some of them I would rather split up into its own video. So today, we are talking about negates in Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, a very present mechanic in a lot of different forms. And if
Very
you look
present
past,
mechanic.
the generic Omni negate that we're also going to cover, there's a lot to it, I think, and they are a very fundamental part to the game, but they do need to be balanced properly, which is something we're going to talk about today. And this is meant to be a little bit of a conversation starter of sorts, something that I want to get your guys' opinion on, and I want to get people talking about this aspect of the game. So I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you do, make sure to leave a like on the video, and most importantly, subscribe. We are getting super close to 100K. Once again, I really appreciate you all for the support and for getting me all the way up here, but just a couple more. So if you're not subscribed yet, then feel free to do so. But yeah, hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and make sure to let me know your opinion in the comments. Now, the thing I want to get out of the way first, before we even start talking about different forms of negations and which ones are healthy and which ones might not be, I want to get one thing straight, which is that I think, and let me know if you agree or not, but as with everything in Yu-Gi-Oh!, if there's an abundance of negates, if someone reaches critical mass with negates, it can make for pretty uninteresting gameplay, right? Maybe if
You
someone
don't
ends on an
say.
interactive board that has one way to negate a card, then that's fine. But if someone
Multiple
ends
cards
on,
even.
something like Mitsurugi Yami endboard and Master Duel these
Ugh.
days, this is just the thumbnail I found when I was
Master
looking
Duel
for
is
a
cooked.
picture of a
Yeah,
Mitsurugi
pretty
Yami
much.
endboard, but this is a realistic endboard for Mitsuyami and Master Duel right now, where they end on not just the Mitsurugi trap, which maybe you could consider healthy if it was in pure Mitsurugi, but also Baron the Fleur, also Herald of the Arclight, and then all the Yami and Mitsurugi interruptions on top of that. So essentially, you're able to negate 3 out of your opponent's 6 cards if they didn't hand trap you at all. And
Crazy.
they're playing with 3 cards against all the rest that you still have. So I feel like we should or could all agree on the fact that this type of stuff is not healthy and also not fun. And similar things with cards like Herald of Ultimateless, right? When
Oof,
Brightfawn was
don't,
doing all of this, right?
don't get me started. What was it? What was the archetype that used him most often? Those ones with the 2000 attack for ritual summoning? Basically, everyone remembered, hey, that funny monster, Herald of Ultimateness, that was literally a parody that seemed impossible to summon. Yeah, let's summon that from now and forever. And basically, that was it. Behold, your main player, your main negator for everything. Just discard and negate when in doubt.
And so this is the type of thing that people criticize when they say like, oh, people.
I guess in one silver lining is the fact since I play more TCG, these types of cards are kind of inadvertently removed. Like for example, Boron has been banned for like what, almost a year now, maybe. Like damn, it's a long time basically, and she's only available in Master Duel because different ban list, I guess, for some reason. Same thing with, for example, Herald. I was always wondering why he got banned until, people told me, oh, he's used in this archetype. And it's like, ah, it makes sense. They have an automatic synchro 4 negator. But of course not. Why not? So yeah, I guess it makes sense. Meanwhile, in Master Duel, those two are pretty much unbanned and used in excess.
Just make 7 negate boards
Similar to Borreload Synchro Dragon. It's stupid.
in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or whatever. Of course, people exaggerate, but sometimes stuff like this happens, and I feel like it is not very healthy, and I think negates do play a role in this situation. One thing that I want to be clear about, though, is that this is not only the case with negation, this is the case with pretty much any form of like interaction. If you just have too much of it, it might become unhealthy, right? This is not exclusive to negates, but of course, if you look at this specific end board, it does play a pretty big role that you can negate the best 3 cards in your opponent's hand because you choose which ones you negate, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And another thing that I want to get out there, and I guess I have to also say this before I criticize the Odeon deck, right? Because the Odeon deck technically is not really like a modern combo deck. Whenever I make these discussions on game design and game balance, right? Only because I criticize one thing does not mean that another thing is okay. For example, if I criticize the Odeon deck for just basically being a deck full of negates for every single card the opponent plays, that does not mean I think that combo slop is okay, all right? But the Odeon deck at the moment is one of my least favorite decks to play against in Master Duel, and I play against it pretty regularly. It is decently popular.
First of all, I have not touched Master Duel in a while, and second of all, I haven't seen anyone play Odeon in locals, which is weird, right? Is the deck like so good it's expensive to get the cards, or like so uninteresting that people just steer away from it? It's kind of weird.
Because quite frankly, literally every single card in that deck is there to stop your opponent from playing the game, right? Like it's the Odeon cards put up 1 to 2 negations, maybe 3 if you can get to 2 copies of Swamp Deity, Anti-Verdict of
Ah,
Anubis. If you draw the Primite engine, that's an extra negate via Drill Beam, and then every
yeah, but that's the Primite engine. Again, why exactly use it? It's kind of like in the Blue Eyes decks. It's like in Dark Magician to add Primite. It's like, sure, yeah, negate, but like, isn't it more of a brick? I don't know. The Primate engine I never found so interesting as to even consider using. First of all, it requires you to have vanilla monsters, and second of all, it's just a singular negate that recycles itself, allegedly. Like, aside from using it in something that has like the once vanilla monster or focuses on vanilla monsters, like Spiral, like the Spiral Dragon, the one that focuses on the summoning a token, equip cards and trap cards that destroy. Like, aside from using Primite in that, the other times I've never found any, peculiar reason as to why you would use Primite with anything else. It just feels like a brick that's just waiting to be placed on the field. You know how, for example, everyone emphasized on playing Dragoon because easy Omni negates someone that becomes stronger. But in the end, it also becomes a major problem because you have to use 3 cards like Red Eyes Black Dragon, Dark Magician, and Red Eyes Fusion to quite literally defeat your opponent. It's like, huh, really? Like, at that point, it's like, why even play the cards? It just feels like you're more so kneecapping yourself as opposed to the opponent. I don't know. I've never found like reasons for those types of cards to be used. Anyway, moving on.
single hand trap in the deck negates as well, right? They play Ash, Dominus Purge, Dominus Impulse, Veiler, Imperm, you name it. Literally every time I play against that deck, they try to negate every single card that I play, and I do find that to be a pretty unhealthy game pattern in general. So the first thing I want to get out of the way when we talk about negates is that if they happen too often, if there is too many in a certain deck, in a certain place, it is uninteresting gameplay, right? This goes for trap cards in the Odeon deck. This goes for Omni negates on generic extra deck monsters in the Mitsurugi Yami deck in this example. It
Yes.
goes for cards that are accessible from the main deck, like Herald of Ultimateless, which just repeatedly negates a card on one monster, right?
Yes,
But it
yes.
also goes for decks that play 20 plus hand traps and try to negate every single thing that the opponent is trying to do, right? That is one of my least favorite things in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is when this kind of gameplay happens where the main form of interaction with the opponent is a negate. So
Yeah,
basically my
yeah.
baseline on negates is that they can exist, but I would really like if there wasn't that many of them, right? Like if a deck
I'd say if they weren't just that many, if they were more so specifically locked into their archetype. Like, for example, how you have something like Cy yeah, Cyber Dragon Infinity is like a great example. First of all, he's somewhat generic. If you can summon Cyber Dragon Nova, it's an automatic Infinity. And you'd think in Cyber Dragons that'd be like a priority or somewhat like an option. Then you have other decks like, for example, Galaxy Eyes or Galaxy Photon to be more specific. They can just like have that one level 5 machine monster they just can plop 2 of on the field, summon Nova, summon Infinity. And then you have like Crystron, was it? Crystron? Yeah, Crystron. That basically just kind of slap Cyber Dragon Infinity out of nowhere. I mean, they even have like a contingency where if you destroy Nova to summon that fusion monster from what was that guy? The wizard that usually fusion summons from the graveyard with different attribute monsters. Hell, if I remember his name now, damn it. But yeah, it's kind of like you'd think that card would be generically tied, would be tied specifically to the archetype and only to be summoned via that. Like for example, Cyber Dragon Nova to use two level 5 light machine monsters to say, or at the very least like two level 5 cyber dragon monsters more specifically to basically lock it into just cyber dragons. But no, it's just two level 5 monsters, and then you use that automatically to make infinity, which at the very least infinity had like the restriction of 3 level 6 machine monsters. But again, it has an easier summoning method to use just Nova on top of it, to use Nova for infinity to smash itself on top of it. Weird phrasing. Strong effects, strong abilities, and everything else, and basically bypasses all of your issues. Like, even if we were to go with something like, what was it? Cyber, not cyber, uh, what? Damn it, I can't remember it now. Bum, 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 bum. Uh, I, I can't say it right now. But like, that's kind of the main problem. It's just they've made him so generic and so easy to access now that old decks just can't compete, and new decks just basically use the exact same cards. Before, it used to have at least some diversity and some options, with some negating, some protecting, some destroying. Now it's just Negation Nation with tons of generic materials to use.
Ends on one, then I'm much more okay with it than if the entire goal of the deck is to negate everything that your opponent does.
Yeah, but see, if they end on one negator, they still have like that one negator to have multiple negations. Ritual Beasts, for example, have that one fusion monster that just states, I can negate on each chain. It's like, what? Sure, that's fair, very reasonable, valid, so fun.
Right. One quick thing for all the TCG duelists from Europe and mainly Germany, there is a
Oh,
regional happening at the Gamescom LAN event in Cologne on March 22nd, which is a Sunday. If you want to take part in this regional, which I also might take part in, I'm not sure yet because that's the same weekend as the Master Duel Duelist Cup coming
meh,
up, but
could
I
care
might I
less.
might be there because I might need the world's points for the
Plus, I'm poor. I highly doubt I could be capable of affording it.
TCG Worlds race.
No way in
I'm
hell
not
am
sure
I
yet, but
capable of
there's a
going
chance you
there.
might meet me there. Anyways, all the info to this regional is in the description down below. It is organized.
Kind of currently in the position of living in the middle of ruins in a post-apocalyptic world, in a different dimension. Kind of difficult for me to go to any place, much less the shop, much less buy groceries. So until I get figured that out, no way am I going to a regional ever or at all.
By a friend of mine, so I'd appreciate if you checked it out and if you have time, if you stopped by. Without further ado, let's get back into the video. So that's the baseline, right? But let's distinguish between different types of negations because they are not all the same, right? We've got cards that can negate everything, right? We've got
Mm-hmm.
Baron the Fleur, which is probably the most popular poster child of this category, even though it's now banned in the TCG, but
I wouldn't exactly say it's the poster child, but it is like from master people from Master Duel that come to see it. Basically, like the main focus, I guess, because it's so easy. It's literally it states one tuner, one non-tuner monster, and for two monsters to make a level 10 monster, you get once per turn destruction, once negation of activation of a card to end destruction, and then during the standby phase, you can literally, like, this is one of the things that pretty much amazes me. It literally has a during the standby phase, you can target one level 9 or level monster in your graveyard to return it to the extra deck and special summon that monster. If you don't know, Baron de Fleur has a level 9 lower, weaker variant that's just Baron, I think it was. Fleur de Baron or something. That's literally a level 9 link that also negates. So a lot of people just kind of ignore the fact that you can, if you summon that one and then just have this one, you can have a negation, destruction, then bounce it back for a second negation. It's like a lot of people tend to forget that. They primarily use it for the first and second effect, forgetting that it's a evolved version of a previous monster. Yeah, that's a fun fact for Barone, if you didn't know.
Master Duel still has it. This card is obviously super, super powerful because it just negates anything that your opponent is trying to do. It doesn't matter if it's in hand, in grave, on field, activation of a card, activation of an effect, does not matter. Baron can negate it. The only small form of a drawback on this card is that it is once while it's face up on the field. So it's not a once per turn. It doesn't.
That's literally a valid restriction. If it wasn't once per turn, this would literally be so busted, you have no idea. Plus, let's not forget the destruction effect. Even though it's on your turn, it's still a destruction effect. Fun!
Refresh basically at the end of the turn, but still an incredibly powerful sort of effect. In this case, personally, where I stand on Omni Negates is that I feel like they are quite frankly just too powerful, and also they feel like the least interactive way of approaching the game, right? Because technically a negate is interaction with your opponent. You know, your opponent does something, you negate it. Technically you've interacted, but Omni Negates just don't feel like their interaction, right? It just feels like when your opponent does something and you just straight up negate it, and there's no way to dodge it for the opponent, which is something we're going to get to with like other cards that target and then negate the card that they target or something like that, right? This just feels like it doesn't really have counterplay. This is just something that like either you have a way to force the Baron out before your important card or your important card gets negated. There's not really much to do, right? Then we have cards that are more limited in what they can negate, which is, for example, Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess, only able to negate monster cards. And believe it or not, Appaloosa is banned for good reason, but also is, in my opinion, when you just look at the negation, a less powerful card than Baron de Fleur. What?
See, Appaloosa is kind of balanced because, again, it focuses on one type of card, and depending on how you summon her, she has that many negates. Because most people usually just focus on summoning her as fast as possible, which can result in her only having 2 negations, whereas others focus entirely on summoning her with the appropriate materials to have the maximum amount of negates, which is 4. Again, it really depends on how you summon her and everything. She's still powerful, she's still busted, but if you're someone like, let's say, the meta players who focus entirely on monster effects and not utilizing any spells or traps that, you know, clear the board or destroy them, again, Fisher is for free. Under stupid as it may sound, if you don't have something on the equivalent of Fisher, you're gonna suffer to something like Appaloosa, which is one of the reasons for why it got banned. A lot of meta players usually don't focus on spells and traps. They usually focus on setting up the field with said spells and traps to negate for a later, not to interrupt your opponent during, not to interrupt or to essentially clear the board of problematic monsters the opponent has. Just saying.
Appaloosa has over Baron de Fleur is that it can go in basically every deck because it's a link monster instead of a synchro. You know, a synchro, even though still relatively easy to access, is slightly harder to make than a link monster. And so every single deck that creates a bunch of monsters can just spit out an Appaloosa to negate multiple monster effects, right? But on paper, a monster negation that doesn't work on spell or traps make this card more vulnerable than Baron de Fleur. You know, like during Appaloosa formats, people were trying different ways to play the game, going second stuff like Talons take the Appaloosa and then use it against the opponent, Change of Heart, Snatch Steal, what you name it. There were certain ways to maneuver around an Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. The thing that made this card toxic were both its accessibility, because it was a link monster, and also the fact that it was multiple negates on one card.
No, it's not the fact that it was a link monster. It's because it has like literally the most generic materials next to something like Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. 2 monsters with different names except tokens. 2 monsters with different names. You can usually link climb into it, or you can just use different monsters with different names to basically immediately make it. No restrictions, no specific monster types, no nothing. Not even the attributes. Like two or more monsters with different different attributes or wind attribute, except tokens. Like, not that many restrictions. Literally as generic as possible to basically be accessible to everyone as much as possible.
Which is a whole nother dimension of powerful, right?
Like, as much as Link monsters are Link monsters, they're still extra deck monsters. The problem isn't the fact that they're a new mechanic. The problem is that this mechanic is literally so easily accessible to everyone, as opposed to having restrictions or different specifications or parameters to, limit access to these monsters.
We've talked about Herald of Ultimateness a moment ago, but like essentially, if Appaloosa was just one monster negate on a Link 4, it would have already been a pretty powerful card, but the fact that it was multiple was what ultimately ended up making it way too powerful. Another aspect.
See, Herald of Ultimateness was stupid because it was literally designed as a level 12 monster that no one in the game could summon. Then Drytrons. Yeah, Drytrons. I now remember the archetype. Drytrons came along, said, we ritual summon using the monster's attacks as opposed to their levels. Guess what monsters we can use, aside from our 4,000 attack beasts, aside from Chaos Max Dragon as well. That's right. The Herald of Ultimateness. Literally a monster that was designed as a joke that no one can summon is suddenly easily summonable to an archetype that literally focuses on summoning with attack monsters. That and the other monsters that it can summon made it so incredibly toxic. It made Drytrons just more noticeable as the Herald of Ultimateness deck as opposed to Drytrons themselves as a 4,000 attack beatstick monsters with battle effects. Was it battle effects? I can't say.
When we talk about balancing of Omni Negates, is that sometimes they can be on relatively small monsters like Herald of the Arclight over here, which was a card that, because of its low level, was actually sometimes harder, sometimes easier to make, but also had some outplay potential because you could sometimes normal summon an attack over Herald of the Arclight, and that made it slightly better to deal with. This
again, Herald of the Arclight is literally, again, more generic, low level attack and pretty much unnecessary. If anything, I remember Herald of the Arclight was literally used as a card to dump into the grave for its effect to net you a ritual spell card. Like, that was literally the main reason for why you were using it. Not the tribute and destruction, not the monsters that are banished instead when they go to the main deck, to the graveyard from the main deck. It was this one. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one ritual monster or ritual spell from your deck to your hand. Any ritual monster or spell, but that was pretty much the main reason for why Herald of the Arclight was used. Now all of a sudden, with the meta becoming so, easily accessible to such old cards, it's all of a sudden like, we can use this. And the weirdest part is, like, Herald is generic as heck, but the archetype that can summon him doesn't restrict you from other monsters. Like, it doesn't say you can only use this type of monster or this attribute of monster. It's just summon to your heart's content. And as a result, generic monster, archetype that has no restrictions, bada bing, bada boom. Easy use.
This is something that, try normal summoning something that beats over Baron the Fleur, right? But the problem with this card, once again, is that this had bonus effects, right? Like, this is obviously, at the moment, I think this card is not banned because of its Omni Negate. This card is banned because it searches Habakiri, and it's also banned because they also put a floodgate effect on it, right? Which, in my opinion, is completely insane card design-wise. I guess they printed it a long time ago when it was really hard to make level 4 synchros, and when...
Again, like, in the distant lands, in the ancient past, literally these types of cards and effects were allowed because no one knew how exactly to make them. Like, even if they made them, it was so difficult to get to them. But nowadays, with everything being so available and generic as heck, it's like, hey, remember this old card? You can use it now. It's no longer a busted card that was very difficult to use. It's now a busted card that everyone has access to, depending on the archetype they use.
Decks weren't as combo heavy yet, so I guess it was okay. Like, this card came out when, like, 2014. Yeah, like, this card came out in a different time, but has aged very poorly. But what this teaches us,
More
in
than
my
a
opinion,
decade
once you
ago.
start adding
Sheesh.
bonus effects to cards that have Omni Negates, I think that's definitely the wrong direction, right? I think stuff like Appaloosa, Baron, and Herald, that teaches us that these cards need downsides. They don't need upsides, right? They cannot have upsides. If they have,
Again, for Herald of the Arclight, I can kind of see because, old card, didn't exactly think that hard for it. Mainly used for its last effect to be a somewhat searcher. Baron is more modern, so yeah, she doesn't get a pass. Same thing with Appaloosa, but at least they tried somewhat. Somewhat being in huge air quotes.
upsides, they will be abused at some point. There's no way around that. So yeah, and then of course, one thing that all of these had in common right now is that they are extra deck monsters, which means that they are accessible every single time, which is an interesting topic in and of itself, because I don't think accessibility and consistency is necessarily a problem. I think things that are like, consistency is a good thing, right? Because no one wants to lose because they just couldn't play the game. So like having consistent access to cards that are fair and balanced is good, but of course it becomes much more of a problem when you have consistent access to cards that are not fair and balanced, right? Which was the case with all these cards, which is why luckily all of these are banned in the TCG right now, and unfortunately 2 out
Thankfully.
of those 3 are still legal in Master Duel. So that's not the greatest, but
Yeah, for you who plays Master Duel. Meanwhile, I'm having the time of my life.
is what it is. Zaylan the Shackled Dragon is an interesting card, and honestly, probably my favorite example of a negation that comes from the extra deck right now. And the reason for this is,
Let me read it. So, one tuner, one or more synchro monsters. Okay, it's level 7. That's a weird one. This card is you control would be used as synchro material. You can treat it as a non-tuner when the card is. Oh, it's because it's a tuner. Okay. When a card or effect is activated, a monster is in response to another card or effect activation, you can activate one of these effects, negate the effect. Negate the first effect. If you do destroy this card, destroy that card. Negate the second effect, and if you do destroy that card. Interesting. So it's kind of like the equivalent of when someone starts a chain, you can have it respond to the first or the second effect. Interesting. That's actually kind of fun as an idea. How come I've never heard of this guy? Zaylan the Shackled Dragon.
that the way this card works actually means it comes with actual outplay potential. And this is going to be very clear once I'm done with discussing all of these cards in today's video, what I mean by this. But when someone summons Zaylan the Shackled Dragon, there is actually room for the opponent to maneuver around this card. Even though this card, in theory, can negate any card in the game,
Once
it
per turn.
only negates it if you're able to create a chain around it, basically. So if
Yeah,
Zaylan
that
wants to
too.
negate a card that's activated as Chainlink 1, there has to be a Chainlink 2. And then Zaylan has to be Chainlink 3 in order to negate either Chainlink 1 or Chainlink 2.
And even on top of that, it's also not as generic because it requires a tuner and a synchro monster. Granted, if you there are methods for you to basically use synchro monsters for summoning this guy. It's relatively speaking generic, but generic in the sense you have to use a synchro engine to basically get to it. So it's not as easily accessible as something like Barone. Not to mention the odd level of level 7 of all things. And again, yeah, this is kind of an interesting negation effect to basically have it be in a chain as the third effect to be activated, where you then get to choose which effect to be negated. The first one, which may be your own card, or the second one, which may be your opponent's card. Very interesting. Confusing, but very interesting. Not gonna lie.
If Zaylan is Chainlink 4, it can only negate Chainlink 2 or 3. So the way this card works
Seriously
is
though,
if your opponent
how did I
activates
never heard
Raigeki,
of this
you
monster?
have to chain
It's
something
from
else
Burst
to it
Protocol
before you
at
can negate it with Zaylan. And if you chain
2026.
something
So
else
it's
to
really
that, if your opponent then
relatively
chains to
modern,
your Chainlink 2,
like
Zaylan
currently.
is going to be
Damn.
Chainlink 4 and cannot negate Raigeki on Chainlink 1 anymore because it's too far down the chain, essentially, right? Because Zaylan can only negate the card it responds to or the card that that card responds to. It's a little bit more complex of a card, but that's also the reason why I like it and why I think it is a fairer way to make a negation. Of course,
It's
sometimes you're not going to have a
balanced.
way to
It's
quote unquote
somewhat
chain block the
balanced.
Zaylan, and then it's just going to negate your Raigeki in this example, but not all the time, right? There is potential to maneuver around it, and I think this is a very important factor to make negates feel more interactive, right? at least there's a loophole that your opponent can play into if they're trying to outmaneuver the Zalen, if they're trying to make their really important card resolve. There is ways for you to do that, right? Most importantly, there is ways that are not negating your negate, right? Because of course, yes, you can droplet a Baron or you can imperm a Baron or whatever, right? But like I think it's pretty clear why I think having to draw a negate for the negate to not negate your important play is not the most interactive play pattern, right?
I think everyone would prefer a less restrictive board breaker, but at the exact same time, they're prone to being negated, so fun.
But yes, so I do think there is a world where like negation from the extra deck can happen, but it does need to be carefully balanced, at least that way that I feel like. Because, or I guess it begs the question, what would happen if we had no negates at all, right? Like what if the negate, what if we just reached a point where negation just wasn't printed on extra deck monsters anymore, and like we just leave cards like Appaloosa, Baron, Herald of the Arclight, we just leave them banned, and we just try to find other interactions, right? Because there's so many other things that decks can end on. You know, you have all kinds of removal, you can create card advantage and follow up, you can have cards that are maybe hard to out or hard to deal with. Nothing forces them to make negates for every deck, right? There's not something that needs to happen.
They're not making negates for every deck. They're introducing a generic monster with high stats and powerful effects that may include negation. That's the problem. They're making them generic, and the decks that use the archetypes that are introduced become as generic as the materials used for the monsters. So all of a sudden now you have monsters that quite literally become so easy to summon. It's basically not a question of whether to use it or not. It's the bigger question of why wouldn't you use it since it's that good? Hence why it's banned. Like, sooner or later we're gonna get a Savage Dragon 2.0, Baron 2.0, technically speaking 3.0, and so on and so forth. Like, when they get unbanned, it's because other monsters that are doing the job better exist. Like, perfect example would be Ultimate Zolkin and Crimson Dragon. Like, Ultimate Zolkin in the past was literally just this no level monster that was used for people to basically churn out something like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. And nowadays it got a different version, Crimson Dragon, that literally just states target a monster on your field with a level, and then Crimson Dragon immediately bounces itself to summon one of the most powerful monsters in your extra deck. Like, you have access to Quasar Dragon, Cypher Dragon, Majestic Star Dragon, like literally monsters with 4,000 attack and negation and protection. It's like, great, just fantastic. Let me just summon a powerful monster and then just add on top of that monster with another monster. It's like, how do you even like bypass that? It's like crazy. And the worst part is like Ultima Zolkin at the very least was a no attack monster that simply had protection on top of it to basically make sure to, defend itself in case your other dragon was destroyed. Meanwhile, Crimson Dragon just returns itself, summons a free powerful monster, ignoring its summoning conditions, has no restrictions on it, doesn't lower its attack or anything, just behold, the monster that before you had to make an entire complex combo to summon is now a freebie given to you for literally almost no price. Just make sure you have the exact same levels to match that of Crimson Dragon, and boom, powerful monster. It's like Ultimate Zolkin has practically before was somewhat useful, but in the end of the day was kind of just meh. Meanwhile, Crimson Dragon is so essential in synchro decks, it's practically not even funny. It's so easy to get to. It's nuts.
I guess we're at a point where having one, let's say one negate on your end board available could be considered necessary for certain formats, because otherwise there are a lot of blowouts these days. You know, if no deck was using,
Given the cards like Nibiru, Ash Blossom, Infinite Impermanence, I'm guessing he's gonna cover them later. One negate is not gonna be enough. Two maybe is good, but somewhat. And three is basically pushing it, but I digress.
Any sort of negate anymore, then people would just go crazy with card like Lightning Storm, Harpy's Feather Duster, Evenly Matched, you name it, which are all cards, of course, that were created because people were ending on more powerful end boards, and so they created these cards to combat more powerful end boards. So now, if we get rid of all forms of negation, they would technically also have to get rid of all of these in order to create a more balanced environment, right? But which is a this is a very difficult topic, the whole like scaling down the power level of Yu-Gi-Oh, because you would basically have to power down both sides equally, right? You'd have to like
You know, we don't know how to power them down very easily. Make the powerful, like, board breakers limited to one. Like, Regeki is limited to one, right? I'm pretty sure it's still limited to one. Lightning Storm is not. Uh, Forbidden Droplet is a bit costly, but at the exact same time, it makes sense why it's not limited. Because then it would be kind of ridiculous. Uh, Same thing with something like Dark Ruler No More. It's very restrictive, but again, it makes sense. Otherwise, why wouldn't you limit it if it had no restriction to just remove stuff? Uh, what else? What else? Evenly Matched also is very powerful, very somewhat effective, but again, it has very logical restrictions to prevent it. I guess what I'm trying to say is cards that have like very powerful restrictions should stay at 3 because they remove monsters or at the very least nullify monsters at the cost of like heavy restrictions so that you can continue so you can play your turn and not be interrupted. Whereas cards like Lightning Storm with almost no cost aside from following the condition of having no face up cards is like it should be limited at one because no face up cards means you can still set monsters and other cards face down. I mean, you can still slap a Lightning Storm on the field and just board wipe your opponent's back row or like monsters. You know, something that before we used to have Raigeki only for monsters or Dark Hole only for monsters, and cards like Harpy's Feather Duster and Heavy Storm for back row. Now this is pretty much a combination of those cards, and it just does it for almost no cost whatsoever. So I think that's the main way you can kind of stop board breakers. Stuff like Lightning Storm to be at one, whereas cards that are more, restrictive but, you know, logical in their negation slash removal, like Dark Ruler and uh, Evenly Matched, should stay at 3 because they are kind of restrictive. Evenly Matched removes your battle phase at the cost of limiting your opponent's monsters and cards on the field, and Dark Ruler No More prevents you from defeating your opponent at the cost of allowing you to basically play the game without being interrupted, while also, nullifying their cards. Another thing is that negators would be better actually to just focus on the type of card they want to negate. I guess the best way to explain it is if they were more like Appaloosa, in a sense that they just negate monster effects, whereas cards like spells and traps are left alone. I think that would be kind of an interesting balance because monsters, for the majority of Yu-Gi-Oh, pretty much enable your combos, strategies, decks, and etc. But there are some archetypes slash cards or decks that use spells as well. Meaning you can still, use the majority of magic cards or something like that to continue your plays, but you have to be very strategic and utilize your monster effects to basically either bait your opponent into negating them or have your opponent take the risk in negating that specific monster that they think would be useful for you, only for them to basically, waste their negates so you can reveal you had a better card in play. Kind of like that. Either that or just have something like the equivalent of Ancient Gear Fortress, where you basically tell your opponent, no, you can't respond to my cards. I get to play. You don't get to to interrupt me in any way, shape, or form. It's very difficult to say if it would be perfect that way, but it feels like it should be like that. You know, like spell cards negate spells, trap cards negate traps, monsters negate monsters. It kind of feels natural that way, I guess.
like tone down the negates, but then you also have to tone down the crazy board breakers. Otherwise, they always crack every board, which is interesting, but at the same time, I think is not super realistic. So I do think there is a place for certain negations to happen. You're gonna laugh because it's Josh loving Draco Tail again, but I do think Draco Tail Flame is a good example of this.
Draco Tail Flame. What was that? Add one face-up spell on the field, negate its effects until the end of this turn. You can place one Draco Tail card from your graveyard or banishment on the bottom of the deck. Except Draco Tail Flame, then draw one card. You can only activate one Draco. A very specific negate. Damn. Like, it's for a spell card to negate it until the end of this turn, of all things. So it's not even like a good negate. It's just nullifies it for the turn. But then again, you also have the fact that you literally recycle a card from graveyard or banish, and you get to draw a card. Like, what the hell? What the hell, Draco Tail?
It does have a lot of things going for it. It does protect an otherwise pretty fair deck from blowout cards like Duster and Lightning Storm. Doesn't protect from evenly. Has counterplay because you can dodge it with everything that removes the spell from the field because it targets the spell in order to negate it. It does have the draw in it, which is a bonus on the one hand, but also makes it vulnerable to Ash and Bell. So I feel like this is something.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have a problem with Ash and Bell if Ash and Bell were not didn't exist. If he gets to the hand traps, I'll talk about it as well.
I don't know. I vibe with the design on this. I do think it is the least interesting card in Draco Tail, to be fair, because I do like Draco Tail as the like interactive deck that it is. And I think this card, if your opponent doesn't have an out to it, of course, it's just like, oh, you activate a powerful spell, I negate it, which is, in my opinion, the least interesting interaction that Draco Tail has. I think all the other things feel more dynamic in the deck. I think it does have a merit. If it's in a deck where it's the only form of negation most of the time, I think it's okay, at least. Nothing too crazy, right? Which I guess brings me to the next topic, or the next kind of negation, which is just searchable negation in these decks, because this is something that a lot of these decks have nowadays, is they just have like this one that they can search. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm always disappointed when the searchable trap card for an archetype is just negate, like Mitsurugi Great Purification here. But once again, I think it depends so much on context, right? Like, I think this card in pure Mitsurugi is fine, right? It's just if it's added to the mix in other boards that are not meant to be backed up by multiple negations, like when a Yami Mitsu deck all of a sudden, even if it's not Master Duel Mitsuyami, even if you look at when Mitsuyami was powerful in the TCG, like the fact that it just had this trap card plus Herald of the Arclight next to a Yami board, next to a Mitsu board, it was just too much. It was too much. Like, maybe Dark Ruler could have been an answer to that deck. Like, it was a legit solution if they didn't have the trap card, but they had the trap card. So I think it's frustrating when that happens. And I think that is the danger when you make searchable traps that are just negates, right?
I think, on the other hand, that it's kind of nice to be a trap card. If it was a spell card, it would have been way fast, and I think it's designed so basically you can have some kind of response and protection against something. But again, the problem isn't the fact that they have it. The problem is that they're generic and can access other cards and monsters that have easily met materials and requirements to be summoned. That's the problem. I think the trap card, and for any archetype that has them in general, is fine. If it's just the one like this that's just negates anything. But the problem is, again, with the amount of accessible monsters that have no restrictions, this pretty much just looks like a cherry on top of the overkill cake when it comes to negations and, like, stun, I guess? Kinda. No, not really stun, just negation. It's kind of okay if it was just by itself, like if the archetype literally just focused on the very monsters themselves. No summons from extra deck, no summons from anywhere else. It just pure on ritual with powerful monsters. It just had this one Omni Negate card. I think it's fine. But again, like I said, the amount of easily accessible materials, no restrictions, and the fact that the extra deck monsters also have no specific requirements or like limitations have made this one single negate just pretty much be the complementary piece as opposed to the main focus to get to before, completing your turn. And like I said, I kind of like the fact that it's a trap card, meaning that if it's your opponent's turn, you can't exactly use it. You have to make sure you have it as a response or to basically use it after your second turn, after the second turn, which is your turn, to basically have a response to your opponent in case they, start pulling off some crazy cards or combos. And as a singular response, it's fine. But again, given the fact that these decks don't function that way, and this is pretty much the last piece of the puzzle that just kind of states I negate any type of card as opposed to a specific type of card, is what makes it overpowered. Again, no restrictions on the archetype and everything is a bigger problem as opposed to the card itself.
Because what's the alternative is like you can just make a solid back row card for these decks that is not a negation, which would mean that the board is still better into Dark Ruler, like because you have layers to it. Like Mitsuyami, let's say they played Magatama instead of Great Purification, would have still been a pretty layered end board. You Dark Ruler it or Droplet it, they still have Surprise set, they still have Magatama set, they still have card advantage because they have a bunch of stuff in hand, and they still have prayers, which, okay, in the Dark Ruler example, they can't use prayers to bring back the Murakumo, but they can still tribute the Murakumo and then bring it back with its own effect, right? So, like, there would have still been a lot of layers to that deck. It would have still been a powerful deck, but it just becomes so much easier for the Mitsuyami player and so much more broken if they can just negate the Dark Ruler, of course. Like, why worry about the back and forth of using your interruptions correctly after you get Dark Rulered if you can just negate the Dark Ruler, right? So, like, yeah. Which is all, this category of cards, the searchable trap cards, is even more exaggerated in the TCG, where you have side decks to just bring these cards into your deck if you don't want the risk of having them in your hand when you're going second in game one. But even in Master Duel, in Best of One, everyone is playing this card.
Man, the side deck really is the problem for everyone, huh? I mean, I don't hate it. It's just really they really focus on that the most.
In Mitsurugi Yami, everyone is playing this card. They're just taking the risk of bricking on it going second because it is that powerful, right? So I think searchable trap cards in general should not have Omni Negates on them. I'm not a big fan of when they do. I think it just has too much risk attached to it, even though if in some cases it is okay if the deck is properly restricted to not go into any slop piles, and also the card is preferably not a straight up Omni Negate, but more like something with counterplay, right? Like Draco Tail. Which brings me to non-engine, I guess, because we've talked about most of the stuff that is like generically accessible via the extra deck or in engine. Negation non-engine, right? It comes in a lot of different forms, and of course, recently I've personally been on a vendetta against Ash Blossom. I personally believe that Ash Blossom does not belong in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and I will elaborate a little bit more later. But in general, like I said earlier, I think the plan of negating all of your opponent's cards is not very fun. Whether you think it's powerful or not is a different question.
I personally despise hand traps because the whole point of it is that you're supposed to have like some kind of cost or restriction so that neither can benefit or gain from it, right? That's the whole point. But it really depends on the type of card you use. Like, for example, Ash Blossom is kind of terrible in the sense that you just, like, literally, your opponent wants to do something, and your cost for basically stopping them is just discarding the card that is using itself to negate said card. It's like, as opposed to having a much more uh, what was it, fierce restriction, like for example you have to discard it alongside another card or something like that. You just discard the card that you negate with, pretty much putting that quote unquote cost or restriction literally into the form of just I use the card and that's it. Like at the very least cards like Effect Veiler that still negate require the monster or card effect to be on the field, which is a huge difference. Like if you want to negate something, it has to be face up on the field. And even more so, it targets, meaning if you have a method of quickly removing your monster from Effect Veiler's target, it pretty much bypasses Effect Veiler's negation and allows for you to continue on and add the cards that you need. Effect Veiler, in a sense, has some good restrictions and clauses that allow for it to be, much more reasonable. And hence why it also has, like, no once per turn restriction, because technically speaking, the monster has to be on the field. The monster has to be something you can target, meaning it still has to be present when you execute the effect. And at the end of the day, it simply negates it, like its effect when it activates. But the monster itself is still on the field. It is still, technically speaking, a resource you can use for extra deck summoning, tribute summoning, and many more variables on top of it. So it's not exactly so much as an interruption as it more so prevents your opponent from assembling a much more crazier board. It still stops them, but it's much more logical and less intrusive as opposed to something like Ash Blossom. That's literally just like, I activate a card, no. I want to search something, no. I want to draw something, no. Just straight up no. I just discard this, no. It's gone. It doesn't have anything. Again, this is still like Effect Veiler, but the big difference is it's any card as opposed to a monster, and it doesn't have any targeting. Meaning anything you activate, regardless spell, trap, or monster, Ash Blossom just says no. And that's kind of like a serious mood killer because, like, what are you gonna do now? It's just like that one card that I had, your opponent just discarded something for cost that's literally nothing, and you get to continue playing. And again, something like Infinite Impermanence as well is also kind of logical, It's a trap card. It has the ability to be used from the hand, which is a nice little plus if your opponent has a monster. But it can also be set. It can also utilize a hidden effect to basically negate a card in the column it was activated, which is something that some people could forget, which is something they have to keep in mind, which, kind of has your mind racing a little bit because if you activate it in the exact same column, you're pretty much screwing yourself over. It's just like someone activates super polymerization in the column you used infinite impermanence, and it's like inadvertently negated it. It's just like, God damn it, I can't believe it. It's kind of funny in that sense. But again, infinite impermanence still has that restriction of targeting a face-up monster your opponent controls. And it's a negation until the end of this turn, not a permanent negation. Technically speaking, Ash Blossom isn't permanent either, but again, the main focus is that it targets the card and it has to be a specific type of card and it's got to be on the field. Not any type of card your opponent activates that just basically results in you discarding and just playing as per usual. It's also kind of something I have problems with Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird has a restriction where after your opponent adds something, you activate it, and it states that neither player can add cards from their, deck except by drawing them. I think that was the clause. But at the exact same time, this so-called double restriction of neither player is meaningless since you can activate it on your opponent's turn and then pretty much bypass the restriction. Like if it said your opponent cannot add, and then during the next turn you can't add, it would be a little bit more balanced, but at the exact same time, it would discourage you from using it as often, which I don't think is a bad problem. It's kind of like a nice little counterbalance in a sense. A bit too much counterbalance, and it kind of kills the vibe. But given the fact that nowadays most decks just kind of summon from the deck, search from the deck, and just summon from the deck, it's maybe it's not that bad of a restriction now that I think about it. Maybe I can't say for certain, but that's what I mean basically. If it's something that quite literally, at the very least, has to have a specific target, a specific type of card, and a specific, and it has to be on the field, it doesn't feel as punishing because they still discard it, but they have to fit in certain other clause slash parameters that they had to have met so they can activate this card. If it's something like infinite impermanence and, you know, effect Veiler, it's fine. But cards like Ash Blossom and everything else is just so unfair. Because you're quite literally almost like paying nothing to basically stop your opponent from doing almost everything. And if you consider the fact that if like you're playing like not a good deck, or the fact, or maybe you're playing a bit too clustered or clunky and don't have any other options, then pretty much negating that card on your from your hand that you immediately activated is just like an immediate game over, because like I said before, at least if they negate your monster on the field, you can still use it for something, utilize it with another card, or maybe pay it as cost so that you can continue your plays. Whereas for Ash Blossom, it just says no, and that's it. No negatives whatsoever.
Because a lot of people have been arguing like, okay, cards like Imperm and Valor, they don't even feel that strong anymore, and it's just something that if you don't resolve them all, try me, they sometimes feel like the next best option you have, but most of the time the gameplay that stems from these cards is not that good anymore, in my opinion, which is not the fault of Infinite Impermanence, it's more so the fault of the card design that's happened since these cards have been so popular, right? Like they've just made more decks that are just better into these cards, right? Decks these days have less choke points, less things that you can meaningfully interrupt with Infinite Impermanence, which usually just boils down to the gameplay of, well, if they have the extender to push through the Imperm, then I'm screwed. K9 Noroi, for example, is something that provides so much card advantage in one card that not hitting it with an Imperm is basically impossible. Or I guess an even better example would be Effect Veiler, because K9 also has Ripper, which negates hand traps, which is something we're also going to talk about in a second. You better believe that. You have to Veiler Noroi. If you don't Veiler Noroi, you are basically losing the game on the spot. If Veiler is the only hand trap that you have in your hand. Of course, there's pairings with like Veiler plus Nib or whatever, but just in general, the concept of these cards, like if your opponent summons Noroi and you don't Veiler it, then the Veiler becomes significantly harder to use after. Right, so and then you Veiler the Noroi, and then you just see if your opponent has the extender or not. If they don't have the extender, they literally just pass the turn and you've negated everything they could have done, or they keep playing like nothing happened, right? If they have Jokul level 5 in hand or whatever, then, you know, the Veiler was for nothing. Which says nothing about the power level of these cards. It just means they're risky to use. But what I do think it does is it provides uninteresting gameplay, and we should strive to move away from this, I suppose.
I think the bigger problem is that also the decks have just become way too fast, so that hand trap negates matter that much. Like they still are powerful, like I said. It's just with the amount of extenders and like new plays that they have and fast pace, no restrictions applied to them, cards like Infinite Impermanence and Effect Failure aren't so much as ineffective. They just don't have that much of an impact in comparison to Ash Blossom. Like I said, Ash Blossom literally doesn't matter what your opponent has. You can just discard it, negate it, and that's it. And if they have the extender, they could continue their play, but if you have something like Ash Blossom and maybe another card like Effect Veiler, suddenly things become much more complex, because Effect Veiler still requires the card to be on the field, and it still requires it to be a monster. Ash Blossom just says whatever card on the opponent activates, and it just negates it. It's like, huh? Like, again, I think that's fair for Effect Veiler and Infinite Permanence, where they have to have a target, and even though it may not impact the game as much, it's still somewhat logical because it negates them adding more resources as opposed to uh, having the resources that they can make with the cards that they have. It kind of adds up, I suppose, because you're still negating, but it's not maybe as impactful. But at the exact same time, it does give you some more breathing room because their combos may be not as effective or as efficient as they should be. That's kind of also one of the things that makes hand trap so weird, in my opinion. I usually use like counter hand traps like cross out, called by, and the spell card Monster Reborn. Literally, that's how it's spelled. Spell card Monster Reborn. To basically counter these hand traps, and the only reason for why I use them in general is just as one-offs for cross out designator, so that I can have a contingency and counter those hand traps. If I could like maximize on Called by the Grave, I would. Technically speaking, I should maximize on Spell Card Monster Born. Either way, my point is that maximizing on hand traps seems to be everyone's priority because most decks beforehand used to basically have one monster that when you negated pretty much stopped you in your entirety, forcing you to either use some spell cards that the archetype has that can extend your plays and continue them until they get hand trapped again. And the worst part is that now modern decks have pretty much got like one singular card that gives you access to everything. Straight up everything. Add two cards. Send a card to the graveyard. Special summon something. Immediately fusion summon. It's ridiculous. So, in the end of the day, the game has sped up so fast that hand traps like Effect Veiler and Imperm are still effective. They're just much less impactful in comparison to something like Ash Blossom because, like I said, Ash Blossom doesn't have to target, doesn't focus on one specific type of card, and it's quite literally no cost for basically telling your opponent no. And with the amount of negates that everyone tends to make, this is pretty much the quote unquote balancing out things, even though it shouldn't be. But either way, it's tiresome. It's very tiresome.
However, when we're talking about negations, I think Imperm and Veiler are actually two of the most healthy forms of negation that we have in hand trap form.
Yes,
because they are not as powerful these days, which I think is a good thing because it makes them worse when you go first. I think an Imperm and
again, they're not as that powerful in general. They just have logical restrictions and specific, you know, clauses that have to be met so they can be activated. You can't activate it on a spell card or a trap card. It has to be a monster, and it has to be on the field.
Veiler is something that most decks these days can play around when they go second, because there's a lot of ways to dodge these cards. There's a lot of ways to play through these cards, and similar to cards like Draco Tail Flame, they just have ways to be avoided because they target, and I think that's important. I think targeting negation is much better in terms of design than just respond to card, negate card, right? Which is one of my
I agree with that. With cards very like much
Dominus
so.
Purge and Dominus Impulse, which I don't think either of these cards are necessarily super broken. I do think Dominus Impulse is on the line of being broken, but like both of these cards have restrictions to them, which I think is good. I think both of these.
What are the restrictions? What was it? Destroy this card. If you activate this card from your hand, you cannot activate the effects of dark, water, and fire. And the other one was like what, light, something, something. Like wow, what a restriction! I'll just set it as opposed to activating it from the hand. It's still a viable negation. It can still be activated during your opponent's turn, right? Can it be activated during your opponent's turn? If your opponent controls a card, you can activate this card from your hand. When this card or effect is activated, that includes an effect that adds a card from the deck to the hand, negate that effect. And if you had a trap in your graveyard, destroy a card. It doesn't say quick effect, but at the exact same time, maybe? I haven't encountered this card as much. But if anything, Impulse is something I've encountered, and most people literally just said it. Pretty much negating the clause, because if you activate it from the hand, that restriction is active. But at the exact same time, if you set it, that restriction is null. Even if they have like the whole well, yeah, like it literally states if you activate it from the hand, you can't activate these types of monsters for the rest of the duel. But since you set it, that negation, that downside is literally null. It's literally null since you activated it face down from your field. So you can continue using your light, earth, and wind monsters.
Broken, but like,
Or in Dominance Purge's case, Dark Water and Fire. It's literally, again, no restriction. Like, why exactly use it if you can just, set it on the field and wait for your opponent to start playing? Like, on the one hand, you already have powerful monsters that have no restrictions. And on the other hand, even though these things have some valid restrictions, they're very specific and they apply only when you decide to activate it, like Infinite Impermanence. Whereas, for example, Infinite Impermanence had like that additional bonus if you set it. This pretty much gives you a downside. But again, that downside is so ineffective. It's practically making you wonder why it's even there. Like, congratulations, I can just bypass things and it won't make sense. It's stupid. I never understood why they made Impulse and Purge in the first place. Like, not even the fact that they just exist. It's just weird how exactly these cards made. Like, I don't
both
know.
of these cards have restrictions to them, which I think is good. I think both of these cards, going second are completely valid. I don't like how powerful they feel when the player going first uses them, but at least they can't negate your opponent's hand traps, which is, I think, the worst category of negates that we're going to get to in a second.
That doesn't matter. Like I said, as trap cards, especially with nowadays, what they can pretty much set any type of card. Triple Tactics Thrust still exists, my guy. Like, that quite literally bypasses the card's restrictions.
I think there's a difference with how powerful these cards feel. Like, and I think it's easy to make it out, right? Like, there's a lot of cards that instantly lose to a Dominus Purge, but have a lot of outplay potential against an Infinite Impermanent, like Ketu, Draco Tail, whatever, you name it. Like, there's a lot of ways to play around imperms, and like every time my opponent passes with set cards, I'm basically hoping it's imperm and not a Dominus card, because those are basically just deleting a card from my hand, whereas imperm and Veiler don't do that. Going second, I have no issue with all of these, even if I'm not a fan of the gameplay that they provide. That is a different topic, right? I don't think any of these cards are too powerful when you're going second. I just think they're not interesting, because the goal of all these cards these days is to not let the opponent play.
Yeah, but again, you're talking as if you're the one who's going to have them going second. What if you switch it around and have your opponent set these cards going first? Becomes a completely different story now, doesn't it? All of a sudden, it doesn't feel as, fair, to say the least. Bypassing the quote unquote restrictions. I don't know. Like I said, it's a big eh. Imperm is somewhat decent. These ones are somewhat infuriating.
In most cases, of
Correction, very infuriating.
course, there's exceptions to this rule. There's certain decks that you can let play, and then you just like negate a key card somewhere down the line, which is usually the most healthy form. And now, my least favorite form of negation is cards that negate hand traps. And I
I'll hear him out first.
know this is controversial because there's people out there that hate hand traps, and they think having cards like Called by the Grave is appropriate so that the rogue deck can play through the Molcharmi or through the Ash Blossom or whatever. Quite frankly, I think at a competitive level, I think this is pretty. I think it's a majority of competitive players that agree. Cards like Called by the Grave just make it way too easy for the player going first because Yu-Gi-Oh decks are too powerful these days. This is just a fact, whether we like it or not. I personally don't think it's a good thing how powerful some Yu-Gi-Oh decks are these days, but I'm also hopeful that they're going to dial down the power level a little bit in the future. But in a world where combo decks exist that essentially auto win the game when they go first, cards that just stop your opponent's only chance of interacting are
Mm.
not okay. And whether it's Called by the Grave or whether it's a generic extra deck monster like Canine Ripper, I don't see a difference in these cases. I think none of this should exist. I think hand traps should resolve. If a hand trap is auto winning the game, then it's obviously also a problem, right? And then the hand trap is the problem, but not Called by the Grave can only ever be a very, very bad band-aid fix to a problem like that, right? Like if you are, for example, if you are of the opinion that Called by the Grave needs to exist because it negates Max C and Max C wins too many games, then the solution is to get rid of Max C as well. Like that is just the thing, right? And so this is also where Ash Blossom goes, by the way. Ash Blossom goes into this category.
Okay, so he's hello. So he's kind of okay. Let's play devil's advocate. On the one hand, yes, it is a terrible band-aid for cards like Cult by the Grave to exist, so you can kind of counter cards like Max C, Ash Blossom, and something like that. But on the other hand, they're a very effective countermeasure against said cards, and they don't have any other countermeasures. When Called by the Grave was first introduced, we had Ash Blossom, we had Ghost Ogre, we had Bell, we had so many hand traps with no way to respond or counter them. So when you had Called by the Grave at 3, it was kind of like, do you play the hand trap, or do you play the thing that counters the hand trap? But unfortunately, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players focused on not having both the hand trap and the counter force at hand trap, which was kind of stupid. Like instead of maximizing your combos and having a counter to the opponent's plays, they focused on utilizing both types of cards to basically counter your opponent and then prevent your opponent from countering you. Hence why Called by the Grave got limited, because what should have been a singular card to counter your opponent's negations suddenly became a card that aids in you continuing your plays after negating your opponent's cards. It's kind of like it tried to create a dynamic back and forth between both sides, but it just kind of failed spectacularly. And then, of course, they tried with other cards. Crossout Designator was created to be the more logical mediator, because now, in order to negate the card your opponent is using against you, you have to play said card. Meaning, you still had to, like, sacrifice that card with the spell in order to basically prevent your opponent from utilizing the effect, which makes more sense. Makes more sense. But again, those were your only two counters, and let's not forget, you have different variables of cards that pretty much have no cost to what exactly to do. Called by the Grave, at least, had a very unique restriction. A, it banished the card, but also B, prevented you and your opponent from activating the exact same type of card, the monster that was banished, for the 2 turns it was banished, basically. So meaning if you played the exact same card that you banished and it was in your hand, you can't use it against your opponent, and therefore it's kind of like a dead, like a brick in your hand. It's kind of pointless. Crossout Designator is, again, also logical. It removes the card from play and prevents the effect from being applied so that you can continue your play. But at the exact same time, you have to have that card be in your deck so you can negate said effect. And again, it's based around a monster effect, not a specific spell or trap. Actually, no, I think it's any type of card as opposed to Called by the Grave. But yeah, you get the point, right? Like those are designed to counter the hand traps, basically to allow for you to continue your play at the cost of not having any way to interrupt your opponent. I think they're valid in their existence because how else would you counter Ash Blossom or other cards that exist? You either play them in order to use counters that can allow for you to play through them, or play other types of cards that allow for you to negate them so that you can continue your play. It is a bad band-aid for these types of hand traps. It's just more so it makes sense to have them, and the ability to have more of them so that you can maximize on necessary pieces while having contingencies against these negates, as opposed to playing them and having the contingencies. I think Called by the Grave was a good introduction. Crossout Designator was a somewhat mediator to a degree. The spell card Monster Reborn is a nice little added plus that like punishes your opponent because you also gain their monster and you can use it as a resource for yourself, which is like a double wombo combo. And overall, I think it's fair. Like if you're going by the mentality of Max C winning duels, yeah, not gonna lie, that thing pretty much allows for you to basically win duels. But again, it exists because if your opponent has crazy combos and summons a ton of monsters, this pretty much allows for you to gather all of your resources to basically make some sort of play, a last ditch resort play, even if you end up getting decked out. It's still something. Something. It's a mixed bag, but I think they need to exist. If they are more prioritized in comparison to hand traps, I think it's fair. Like, like I said, the only reason for why I play them is so I can use them for cost on crossout designator. I literally play one of either Ash Blossom, Drawn Logbird, and maybe Nibiru, and the crossout designator, which is unfortunately limited in the TCG, is at one. But I still play it because if I encounter those cards, I can just negate them with crossout. Same thing with Called by the Grave. I still play it because if I encounter that card, I can just negate it. And spell card Monster Reborn. In case I encounter it, I get a free resource at the cost of continuing my play. I think they've warranted their existence. Against cards like this that pretty much have no cost, this is kind of like your counter to that no cost to basically punish while also preventing your opponent from, you know, uh, while also preventing your opponent from making the crucial play from stopping you. It's very confusing, but I think it's warranted. I think they deserve to exist as spell cards. And again, they're like Infinite Impermanence and Effect Veiler. They have to have a specific target, being, of course, the monster that you banish from the graveyard, from your deck, or from that you special summon from the graveyard. And again, it has to be a monster. So cards like Infinite Impermanence, well, Crossout Designator does work with Infinite Impermanence as well, but what I'm trying to say is that for hand traps like these, it's perfectly warranted. And if you maximize more on having counters against these types of cards, is way better than having to use these cards with the counters. I think it should be more to focus on which type you want to use. The ones that negate or the ones that stop the negators. I think that's valid.
Category, whether you like it or not. This is something I made a video about this a while ago, and I think bunch of people agreed with me, but also a lot of people called me crazy for wanting Ash Blossom banned. I want to clarify a couple of things about this. I don't think Ash Blossom is too powerful of a card in general.
It
What I
never
dislike
was.
about Ash Blossom is that it is a relatively mediocre card going second. It's still a decent hand trap, don't get me wrong. Just like even better than Impermanent Veiler most of the time, I
It
would
is
say.
better.
But for the most part, the gameplay that Ash provides going second is not super interesting. You just Ash something and hope they can't play. Against most decks, this is true. It's not true against every deck. My GOAT Draco Tail coming through with good game design and balance again. Against Draco Tail, you can hold Ash for like a late Rahu.
Man, he really is glazing Draco Tail, huh?
Or for one of the traps on your turns, completely fine. But against most decks, you just Ash one of the first things you see. You, of course, try to wait for an important choke point, but most of the time, relatively early, you Ash them, and you just hope that that makes them unable to play or at least play very little.
Yeah,
Which
pretty
is
much.
not great gameplay, but fine. I would be fine if that's what Ash was doing.
I mean, what do you mean not great? It's still a response. You're still stopping your opponent from doing something. It's not perfect, yes, but I wouldn't exactly call that bad.
All the time, but I think Ash is just ridiculously strong for the player going first because, first of all, it negates Mulcharmies, which is a different topic, whether you like the Mulcharmies or not. I personally am a fan of the Mulcharmies because I
Can't
think they
say.
give the player going second a reasonable chance to win. I don't think they make it super easy to win all the time going second with how modern decks play into them. You know, you look at decks like Vanquish Soul, you look at decks like Draco Tail, even Yami, most of those decks are completely fine into the Mulcharmies. If anything, Fuva is maybe a little bit too strong, but the way they're designing decks these days, most of them are now fine into Fuva. So on a competitive level, I think the Moltramis just should resolve. The even bigger problem is just that the player going first after they've ashed a Molcharmi is just playing against 4 cards and still doing the full combo with 1 or 2 cards, which leads to a full board, and then the opponent just doesn't have enough resources to win the game. And if your opponent doesn't have a Molcharmi, then you're already favored to win the game. You're already making a board. And then you also have Ash on top of all of this, which is one of the most powerful Omni negates because it cannot be dodged like Impermer Veiler. You know, it can't, it doesn't target. It just changes to
Yes,
basically
yeah.
any starter in the game and negates it. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
just creating a hand trap that had nothing to do with your end board with one of your opponent's starters, and now they're infinitely less likely to win the game.
Yep,
I've been
yep.
paying attention to this since I made the video, and I've seen so many more games won by Ash when the player was going first, holding it, than Ash actually making a meaningful difference going second. And if Ash was winning the game going second, most of the time, if it wasn't against Draco Tail, it was just because it made the opponent pass because they drew one starter, which wasn't very enjoyable. So I guess this is my daily Ash rant out of the way, but in general, I think the player going first in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is already very much favored. So I think cards
Oh
that
yeah,
negate
absolutely.
interaction when you're going first are not healthy for the game, is how I feel about it. Which brings me to the last category of cards that are technically also non-engine, which is the solemn traps, or I mean counter traps in general, right? I technically have no issue with these. I think cards like Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment are fine power level wise. They are. The thing is, I don't think these cards are interesting either. And I guess I hope I was able to make it clear. And I'm interested to hear from you guys on whether you feel the same way about negates in general. I don't find these cards interesting, but they are also on the priority list of cards that I'm concerned about when it comes to the side deck. These cards are very low, right? Like when my opponent is siding in Solemn Strike, at least they're not siding in a Floodgate. So I guess I'll take it. And also, they don't negate.
These ones are basically confusing because, first of all, they're counter traps, meaning they're spell speed 3, meaning that cards like monsters with quick effects and spell cards with quick effects can't respond to them. And second of all, they're, you know, counter traps. They have to be set face down, and they have to be activated in response to something, not immediately. You have to be selective. When Solemn Judgment got limited, I was at the exact same time, first of all, valid. Even though you pay half your life points, you negate any type of card or even summon. But on the other hand, it's a counter trap. You have to specifically search for it. It's wishy washy. It's not perfect, but I wouldn't exactly call it bad. It's just meh. You can play it, you can't play it. You don't if you don't want to play it, you don't have to play it. It's fine.
Hand trap. So if I have like a Molcharmi, my opponent might be able to say like, okay, I'll set my Solemn Strike and pass to not give you as many draws, but then at least I get a chance to play the game, which is different than if the Solemn Strike was like a Cult by the Grave or an Ash Blossom. Like I would 10 times like more like I would prefer to play against Solemn Strike than an Ash Blossom when I'm going second,
Yeah,
which I think
yeah.
says a lot about the power of Ash Blossom going first when you look at what's how good of a card Solemn Strike.
And again, like I said, those cards still have some kind of cost. Even though it's like from 1500 to 4000 life points, you're still paying your own life points that could, at the end of the day, cost you and lose you the duel. It's not 100%, but it's still something that counts and can be very, very, crucial in your duel. Because life points, even though you may pay half at the very least at first, sooner or later that half is gonna make a big difference because your opponent might summon something that exactly deals you that amount of damage directly. And all of a sudden, if you had more life points, it's a gamble, but at the exact same time, that's reasonable. You're you're you have a gamble that makes a logical decision and a logical paying cost so you can continue playing. It's not perfect. It has to be set. Definitely has to be set. That's a key factor because it's not a spell. But again, you pay a cost to do something, and it has a contingency of being something that unless your opponent has another of it, like another counter trap card, it literally they literally can't do anything. You just activate it, pay a cost, and they can't do anything about it. And it's only for a specific card. It's not a board breaker. It's not a full on disruption. It could be a very, very specific hit that can either allow for you to stall your opponent or save yourself, or to prevent your opponent from doing something devastating. It's very, very much more very tactical and logical as opposed to something that pays no cost and just does the job.
Strike. But so yeah, I think these cards are fine for now. I think once they get rid of all the floodgates and stuff, hopefully for the side deck, then maybe these are something that everyone is going to play and then we can talk about them again. But for now, I think it is
Even then, I highly doubt they'd play it over floodgates. Like, again, they would, but I highly doubt it'd be that much. They'd either maximize on 3 strikes or 3 solemns or just the 1 or 3 judgments. It depends,
pretty
really.
low on the list of priorities. Yeah, it's a difficult topic, and I hope I wasn't rambling too much in all kind of different directions. But
I'm pretty sure
TLDR,
I
I
beat you
guess,
in
to get this to
ramblings.
a close, so this isn't too long. I think negates have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think at the point where we are, we do need ways to stop super powerful board breakers, or at least like not auto lose to a single card when we're going first.
I
I
agree to
think it's
that
all right if
statement.
decks have a way to set up like a specific negation. I'm a much bigger fan of cards that negate just monsters or just spells or whatever, because that leaves room for counterplay, right? Like if
Yes,
something
I
only
agree
is a
to that
monster
as
negate, you
well.
can out it with spells. If something's only a spell negate, you can out it with monsters, which is more interesting than just straight up losing a card to it all the time. I think if they're making Omni Negates, I would like them to be more like Zalen the Shackled Dragon, which has outplay potential built in.
Yeah, I can also agree with this one. This is a very interesting counter Omni Negate. Like it's it's very fascinating. I've never heard of this guy, and he's very recent, but very well thought out. Not gonna lie. If negates can be something like this, where they have to like counter, and then you have something like this that gives you a third like option, but it's a very specific and it has to be a third in the chain, then yeah, it kind of makes sense. I can see the type of negation with this card that could be implemented, but at the exact same time, well, I'm not that I'm not certain. I'm just not sure if it will actually fly. Is what I'm trying to say.
Wish to not see as many cards that are straight up just like Baron,
Yeah.
Appaloosa, which is just the monster negate but negates multiple things.
Yeah.
Searchable
Multiple
counter
monsters.
traps and archetypes, that sort of stuff is something I'm not a big fan of. I think when it comes to non-engine, I think targeted negation is okay.
Yes.
Even though not the most interesting, but fine.
It's balanced.
I think negation that just responds to a card and straight up negates it without any chance to dodge it is kind of cringe.
Yep.
And Ash Blossom, because it negates hand traps and hand trap negates in general, don't really have a place in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! At least not at 3. Like, I'm not a fan of Cult by the Grave being at 1, and every time it happens, I'm annoyed by it, but at least it doesn't happen as often.
Thank you.
I personally,
Thank you.
As of now, I don't see a reason why Ash shouldn't follow the same path. And when it happens in engine, it's even worse, because then they do it every game, right? So K9 Ripper is probably one of my least favorite cards designed in recent years. That's crazy. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know, did you enjoy this video? Should I make more about different aspects of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card
Pretty
game?
solid
I'm thinking
video.
about making one video on just like what I consider good and healthy interactive Yu-Gi-Oh! If you would like to see that, then feel free to let me know. If there's any other aspects of the game that you would like me to cover, you know, like make a dedicated video on floodgates or whatever. I don't know if I've ever done that. Let me know.
That
Also,
should
let
be
me
an
know what you think of
interesting
the
one.
style of this video. I currently don't really have the time to completely properly script all of these through and then have them edited with like fancy stuff.
It's
That is
fine.
usually something I would prefer to do, but I'm just like don't have the time to manage all that at the moment, to be honest with you. But if that's something you would prefer, then also feel free to give me that feedback. Until then, thank you all so much for watching today. Let me know your opinion down below. Make sure to subscribe so we can hit 100K. And thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Peace.
You heard the man. Make sure to subscribe. I want to reach 100K too.